Welcome back, horror lovers. Tonight, did you know that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed yet? I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. Your interaction really helps the channel grow and allows more people to see my content. Thanks so much for your support. I never thought my military career would land me in the coldest, most desolate place on Earth, Antarctica. And no, I wasn't some big shot commander or special ops guy. Just a regular officer assigned to what they called a containment facility. Our job? Guard something frozen in the ice. To this day, I don't know the full story. All I know is what I saw and what I lived through. It all started with a briefing that was vague, even by military standards. We were flown to a base buried deep in the Antarctic tundra. No insignias, no signs, just snow and ice for miles. The facility itself was an engineering marvel, a labyrinth of steel and concrete buried beneath the glacier. They told us it was a joint research operation with top scientists from around the world, but something about their explanation felt off. Right away, I noticed these scientists weren't the friendly, chatty types you see in documentaries. They moved like they were carrying secrets heavier than their equipment. And the rules? Don't ask questions, don't talk to the researchers. Don't wander off, and above all, don't touch anything. But what really got to me was the main containment area. They called it the vault. This enormous circular chamber, deep underground, kept at sub-zero temperatures. Access was restricted to the lead scientists and 2 officers on rotation. When it was my turn to guard the place, I got my first glimpse of what we were dealing with. Inside the chamber was this massive block of ice, like something carved out of a glacier, but it wasn't natural. The ice was too clear, too perfect. And inside? It didn't look human. The thing was humanoid in shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs too thin, and the head was elongated, almost egg-shaped. Its skin, if you could call it that, was pale and smooth, almost translucent. Even frozen solid, it looked unnatural, alien. At first, I thought it was some elaborate prank, a training exercise to test our discipline. But the way the scientists acted around it, they were terrified. Not curious, not excited, terrified. They'd whisper to each other in hushed tones, and sometimes I'd catch them arguing. Once, I saw one of them storm out of the chamber, pale as a sheet, muttering about how it shouldn't exist. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What was this thing? Where did it come from? How did it end up here? But every time I tried to bring it up, my superiors would shut me down. Your job is to follow orders, they'd say. Nothing more. The real turning point came about 3 months into the assignment. I was pulling another overnight shift in the vault, and one of the researchers, a guy named Dr. Alvarez, came in late. He was carrying a case of instruments and looked like he hadn't slept in days. I remember him fumbling with his equipment, swearing under his breath, and finally slumping against the wall like he couldn't take it anymore. "Do you ever think about what we're doing here?" he asked me out of nowhere. I didn't know what to say. We weren't supposed to talk casually, especially not about that. So I just shrugged and said, I don't ask questions. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. You should. You really should. That's when he told me something I'll never forget. He said the thing in the ice wasn't just some frozen relic. It wasn't dead. Or at least, they weren't sure it was dead. He said they'd been monitoring faint energy readings coming from it, pulses, almost like a heartbeat, except not like any heartbeat we'd ever seen. It's dormant, he said, but it's not dead. That one sentence changed everything for me. Suddenly, the strict rules, the secrecy, the fear, it all made sense. This wasn't just a scientific curiosity, it was a potential threat. And we were sitting on top of it, guarding it, without knowing what it was or what it could do. I tried to press him for more details, but he clammed up after that. Forget I said anything, he muttered before leaving the chamber. But how could I forget? Every time I stood in that room after that, staring at that thing in the ice, I couldn't help but wonder, what happens if it wakes up? Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Like how the temperature in the vault seemed to fluctuate more than usual. The sensors would go off, and the techs would chalk it up to equipment malfunctions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I swear I heard a faint humming sound coming from the ice. Not loud, just barely audible, like the low hum of a distant machine. When I asked the techs about it, they brushed me off. You're imagining things, they said. Maybe I was. Or maybe I wasn't. Whatever the case, I started feeling this itch in the back of my mind. Not a literal itch, but a nagging curiosity. I wanted answers. I needed to know what this thing was, where it came from, and why we were guarding it. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I started digging. I didn't have access to classified files, of course, but I started listening, watching, piecing together bits of overheard conversations and stray documents left out in the lab. What I found wasn't much, but it was enough to paint a disturbing picture. The thing in the ice had been discovered years ago, buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. It wasn't in a glacier, it was in solid bedrock, which meant it had been there for a long, long time. Longer than humanity had been around. By the time my rotation ended, I had more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, whatever the thing was, it wasn't supposed to be here. And I wasn't sure we were supposed to be guarding it. The itch to know more about the thing in the ice grew worse after the conversation with Dr. Alvarez. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was like a puzzle I couldn't leave unfinished. I didn't tell anyone about my interest in a place like that. Showing too much curiosity could get you reassigned, or worse. But I kept my eyes open and my ears sharper than ever. One evening, during an unusually quiet shift, I got my chance. There was an old storage room near the labs, one that most of the newer personnel avoided. It wasn't locked, nothing in there was marked as classified, but it was filled with stacks of dusty equipment, old files, and other things no one seemed to care about anymore. I'd passed it dozens of times without a second thought, but something about that night felt different. The quiet was almost eerie, like the base itself was holding its breath. I slipped inside, keeping the door cracked just enough to hear if anyone was coming. The air was musty, and the dim fluorescent light flickered unevenly. I shuffled through the clutter, careful not to disturb anything that looked important. Eventually, I found a cabinet filled with folders, old mission reports, equipment logs, and a few handwritten notes that didn't seem to follow any official format. One of the folders caught my attention immediately. Its label read Operation Deep Freeze Archive 73. It was older than most of the other documents, with the edges yellowed and the ink faded. I opened it carefully and skimmed through the pages. Most of it was mundane, lists of supplies, weather reports, and transportation schedules. But buried near the back was something that made my stomach tighten. It was a report from a geological survey team. The report detailed how they'd been drilling in a remote section of Antarctica, far from any known research stations, when their equipment hit something unexpected. The description was vague, but the words artificial material and non-terrestrial origin stood out like warning signs. The team had been pulled out immediately, and the site was classified as restricted. Shortly after that, the vault was constructed. There was no mention of the frozen figure directly, but the timeline lined up too perfectly to be a coincidence. I was so focused on the report that I almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching. I shoved the folder back into the cabinet, closed the drawer as quietly as I could, and slipped out of the room just as someone turned the corner. It was one of the scientists, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were muttering to themselves, clutching a clipboard, and walking fast like they were late for something. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one feeling uneasy about this place. The next day, something strange happened. The power went out. Not for long, maybe 30 seconds, but long enough to throw everyone off. Power outages weren't uncommon in Antarctica, but this one felt different. When the lights flickered back on, I noticed that the security monitors in the vault had gone blank. A couple of techs rushed down to check the systems, and when they came back, they looked spooked. "All systems are operational," one of them said, "but we can't explain the temperature drop." That caught my attention. I wasn't on duty that night, but I made a point to ask around. Apparently, the temperature in the vault had dropped several degrees during the outage, even though the environmental controls were supposed to keep it stable. No one could explain why, and the scientists didn't seem eager to investigate. What's worse, I overheard one of the senior officers arguing with a researcher later that day. "We need to shut this down," the researcher said, "before it's too late." "Shut it down?" the officer snapped. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here? You don't shut it down, you keep it contained." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the report, the outage, and the argument I'd overheard. It was clear that whatever we were guarding wasn't as contained as they wanted us to believe. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about the bigger picture. Why was this thing so important? Why was it buried here in the first place? And why were we guarding it instead of studying it? I decided to take another look at the vault, even though my shift didn't start for a few hours. I made up an excuse to the officer on duty, something about needing to check the logs, and made my way down there. The room felt colder than usual, even with the environmental controls running. The block of ice sat in the center of the chamber, as still and silent as ever. But something about it seemed different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but then I noticed the faintest crack along one side of the ice. It wasn't big, barely the width of a hair, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. I called over one of the techs, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hey, has anyone noticed this before?" The tech squinted at the ice and shook his head. "I don't think so. It's probably just a stress fracture. Happens all the time with temperature shifts." I didn't buy it. The ice was supposed to be stable, and the temperature was monitored constantly. A stress fracture didn't add up. But I didn't push the issue. Instead, I made a note of it in the logbook and left the vault feeling more uneasy than ever. By the time my shift ended, I couldn't stop thinking about the crack. If the ice was starting to weaken, what would happen next? And why weren't the scientists more concerned? It felt like they were hiding something, not just from the outside world, but from us as well. The day after I noticed the crack, things started to escalate in ways none of us could ignore. It began with the equipment. Sensors, cameras, even our basic environmental monitors were acting up. The techs said it was minor interference, but their nervous glances told a different story. It felt like we were walking on thin ice, no pun intended. One incident in particular stood out to me. I was in the monitoring room with another officer, Martinez, reviewing footage from the vault. The cameras, normally crisp and clear, were filled with static. It wasn't consistent, just brief flickers every few minutes, but enough to make it hard to see what was happening. At one point, during one of the flickers, the outline of the figure in the ice looked different. "Did you see that?" I asked Martinez, leaning closer to the screen. "See what?" he replied, frowning. "I swear it moved. Just slightly." Martinez laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't imagining things. The cameras flickered again, and this time the entire feed cut out for a few seconds before coming back online. When it did, everything looked normal again. Or as normal as it could be in a room guarding a frozen entity. "Probably just a glitch," Martinez said, but his voice lacked confidence. Later that day, I overheard a conversation between two researchers in the break room. They were speaking in low voices, but the tension in their words was unmistakable. "It's destabilizing," one of them said. "The ice isn't going to hold forever." "It doesn't matter," the other replied. "As long as the protocols are in place, we'll contain it." Protocols don't mean anything if it wakes up. That last sentence stuck with me. If it wakes up. It wasn't just a hypothetical scenario. They were genuinely worried about it. I'd spent months trying to convince myself that the thing in the ice was just a curiosity, something inert and harmless. But now, even the researchers weren't sure. That night, I was assigned to patrol the outer perimeter of the base. It was a relief to get some fresh air, even if it was below freezing. The sky was clear, the stars brighter than I'd ever seen, and the snow crunched under my boots with every step. For a moment, it felt peaceful, almost normal. But that peace didn't last. As I was making my rounds, I noticed a faint vibration under my feet. At first, I thought it was just the usual rumble from the generators, but this felt different. It wasn't constant, it came in short bursts, almost like a pulse. I crouched down and pressed my hand to the ground. The vibration was stronger there, faint but unmistakable, like something deep beneath the ice was stirring. When I reported it to my superior, they dismissed it as seismic activity. Antarctica is full of surprises, they said. Probably just a minor ice shift. But I wasn't so sure. The timing was too convenient, especially with everything else that had been happening. I decided to keep my observations to myself, at least for now. The following morning, I was called into a briefing with a small group of officers and researchers. They said it was a routine status update, but the tension in the room suggested otherwise. One of the senior scientists, Dr. Lang, began by showing us a series of charts and graphs, none of which made much sense to me, but her tone was grave. We've detected fluctuations in the energy field surrounding the specimen, she said. It's faint, but it's increasing in frequency. What does that mean? One of the officers asked. It means something is changing, Dr. Lang replied. We're not sure what, but we need to be prepared for any eventuality. The room fell silent after that. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking, that the thing in the ice might not be as dormant as we believed. I spent the rest of that day on edge, keeping my distance from the others. I didn't trust anyone anymore, not the researchers, not the officers, not even myself. Every noise, every flicker of the lights felt like a warning. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from going back to the vault. This time, I wasn't on duty. I had no excuse to be there. But my curiosity overrode my better judgment. The chamber was empty, the air colder than usual. The block of ice sat in the center, as imposing as ever. But now, the crack was larger, almost like a thin vein spidering across the surface. I approached it cautiously, my breath visible in the freezing air. As I got closer, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a faint glow coming from within the ice. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a soft, bluish light that seemed to pulse rhythmically, like a heartbeat. I reached out instinctively, stopping just short of touching the ice. The glow intensified for a moment, then faded back to its faint shimmer. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to step back. Whatever this thing was, it was reacting to something. And that something might have been me. I left the vault feeling more unsettled than ever. The glow, the vibrations, the energy fluctuations, it all pointed to one conclusion: the thing in the ice wasn't just a relic or an artifact. It was alive. And we were waking it up. After my encounter with the glowing ice, I decided to keep what I saw to myself. I didn't know who I could trust anymore, and honestly, I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me. The scientists had their own agenda, and the officers seemed more interested in following orders than asking questions. But one thing was clear: whatever was happening wasn't going to stop on its own. The next few days were tense. The equipment malfunctions were getting worse, and the temperature in the vault was becoming harder to stabilize. At one point, the chamber's temperature dropped so low that frost began forming on the walls, a phenomenon no one could explain. The techs scrambled to fix it, but the lead scientist, Dr. Lang, dismissed their concerns. "It's an anomaly, nothing more," she said, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Meanwhile, the crack in the ice was growing. It wasn't obvious at first glance, but I started noticing subtle changes every time I checked the chamber logs. The fracture lines were spreading outward like a web, and the faint glow I'd seen was becoming more pronounced. It was almost like the ice was alive, responding to something we couldn't see. One night, I was assigned to monitor the vault's external systems. It was a relatively quiet post, just me and a bank of monitors displaying readouts from the chamber. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. The temperature, pressure, and energy readings were all within acceptable ranges. But then, out of nowhere, the energy levels spiked. The monitors lit up with red alerts, and a sharp, rhythmic beeping filled the room. I leaned in, trying to make sense of the data. The energy field around the ice had surged to levels far beyond anything we'd recorded before. It wasn't just a fluctuation, it was a pattern, a pulse. I radioed the control room to report the anomaly, but before I could finish, the lights flickered, the beeping stopped, and for a moment, the monitors went completely dark. When they came back online, the energy levels had dropped back to normal, as if nothing had happened. "What's going on down there?" one of the senior officers demanded over the radio. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but something's not right." They told me to stay put and keep monitoring the situation, but I could tell they were just as confused as I was. The next morning, I noticed that some of the scientists were missing from the usual briefing. When I asked about it, I was told they'd been reassigned to other projects. It didn't sit right with me. These weren't just random researchers. They were some of the top minds on the team, the ones who'd been working on the ice for years. Why would they suddenly be reassigned? I started asking around, discreetly of course. Most people either didn't know or didn't want to talk about it. But one of the junior techs let something slip. "They didn't get reassigned," he whispered. "They left." "Left? Why?" He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I heard one of them say it wasn't safe here anymore. That we're poking at something we don't understand." I didn't press him further. The fear in his voice was enough to tell me he believed it. And honestly, I was starting to believe it too. That evening, I decided to take another look at the old files I'd found in the storage room. I wasn't expecting to find much, but I figured it was worth another shot. As I flipped through the folders, something caught my eye. A series of handwritten notes tucked between the pages of an old mission report. The notes were messy, scrawled in a mix of shorthand and full sentences, but one phrase stood out: "Do not disturb. Reactive to external stimuli." I stared at those words for what felt like minutes. Reactive to external stimuli. That could explain the energy fluctuations, the glowing, even the cracks in the ice. But what kind of stimuli were we talking about? Heat? Light? Movement? Or something else entirely? I copied the notes into my own notebook and carefully put the folder back where I found it. If anyone knew I was looking through restricted files, I'd be in serious trouble. Later that night, while browsing on the base's internal network, I stumbled upon something truly disturbing. Someone had anonymously uploaded a trove of classified documents, the same files I'd been desperately searching for, to the dark web. And they were spreading like wildfire. The whole world was about to know about the thing in the ice. Let's be real, nobody takes a job from the dark web out of sheer curiosity. It's usually out of desperation, and that was exactly my situation. I was scraping by with odd jobs that barely covered rent, so when I stumbled upon a post that didn't involve anything illegal, just plain weird, I jumped at the opportunity. The job was simple: graveyard cleaner for a private estate owned by some eccentric millionaire who was obsessed with keeping his family's resting place spotless. My first night was surreal. The graveyard was on this massive estate just outside of town, hidden behind these ancient willow trees. It was eerily silent, exactly how you'd imagine a graveyard to be. I found my instructions in a small wooden caretaker's hut: clean the tombstones, clear any debris, and make sure the paths were spotless. Seemed straightforward enough. The first few hours flew by. I was busy scrubbing moss off old marble and sweeping up leaves. It was almost meditative, you know? The peacefulness of it all. I got totally lost in the rhythm of the work. But then the sun went down, and the moon cast these long, creepy shadows across the gravestones. That's when things started to get weird. It began with a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind messing with me, but then I heard it clear as day: Alex. It was soft, like an echo drifting between the rows of tombstones. I froze, brush in hand, and scanned the darkness, trying to find whoever was messing with me. But there was no one. Just endless rows of graves and those creepy, silent trees. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was just my imagination running wild. But as the night went on, the whispers got louder and more frequent. Always that same murmur just over my shoulder: Alex. I kept spinning around, expecting to catch someone, but there was never anyone there. And then I saw her. This little girl, maybe 10 years old, darted between the tombstones. She was dressed in this old-fashioned dress, clutching a porcelain doll. She moved so silently, her pale face half hidden by a tangle of dark curls. Every time I blinked, she seemed to vanish and reappear somewhere else, always just out of reach. I thought I was losing it, like I'd seen one too many horror movies. But then she stopped and looked right at me. I froze. Her eyes were wide and staring, and she whispered my name again. This time, it wasn't on the wind. It was clear, close, and chilling. I wanted to ask her who she was, what she was doing there in the middle of the night, but something in her eyes stopped me. There was this deep sadness in them, mixed with this ancient knowing, like she knew this graveyard better than anyone. I finished my work quickly, my earlier calm replaced by this prickling feeling of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling of her eyes on me, watching my every move. By the time I was done, the sky was starting to lighten. I got out of there as fast as I could, with more questions than answers. Every whisper of wind through the willow trees sounded like her voice, and every shadow seemed to hide her little running form. I knew one thing for sure: I had to go back the next night. Not just because it was my job, but because I needed to know who she was and why she was calling my name. I drove home as the sun came up, my mind racing with thoughts of the girl and her doll. I was determined to find answers, even if part of me was terrified of what those answers might be. The next night, as I drove back to the estate, my mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. Who was that little girl? Why did she seem so familiar, yet so out of place among the graves? The air was cooler than the night before, the sky clear and filled with stars. It felt like tonight, the answers might be closer. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, the whisper of my name still echoing in my ears. As I approached the wrought iron gates of the graveyard, the moon bathed the tombstones in a soft, eerie glow. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the hallowed grounds. My plan was simple, clean like I had the night before, but stay alert, ready to follow any sign of the mysterious girl. I started in the farthest corner of the graveyard, where the oldest graves were a section filled with towering angels and weathered crosses. As I scrubbed each stone, I kept my eyes and ears peeled for any movement or sound. It didn't take long for the silence to break. A giggle, light and fleeting, floated through the air. I looked up, my heart pounding. There she was again, the little girl in the Victorian dress, her doll clutched tightly. She was further away this time, half hidden behind a large mausoleum. I set down my brush and followed cautiously, keeping my distance. As I rounded the corner, I saw her peering at me from behind the marble structure. "Hello," I called softly, not wanting to scare her. She didn't answer. Instead, she started walking slowly towards another part of the graveyard, her steps silent on the soft earth. I followed, keeping a respectful distance, feeling like she was leading me somewhere, showing me something. We stopped in front of a particularly ornate tombstone, one I hadn't cleaned yet. It was covered in intricate carvings of flowers and vines. The girl stopped at its base and looked up at me, her expression solemn and curious. I stepped forward and read the inscription. It was the grave of a young child who had died over a century ago. The name on the grave was Alexandria. My name. Alexandra. A shiver ran down my spine, but not from fear. It was more like a realization, a connection across time. The girl reached out her small hand and brushed the stone. Then, as if satisfied, she turned and walked back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as she had appeared. I stood there for a moment, touched by the serenity of the place. A feeling of peace settled over me, despite the strangeness of the night. With newfound respect, I cleaned Alexandria's tombstone, pondering the lives of those resting here, their stories whispered in the rustling leaves and seen in the moonlit shadows. Tonight, the graveyard didn't feel lonely. It felt alive with memories, and I was there to listen. As dawn approached, I finished my tasks and prepared to leave, my mind filled with thoughts of the girl and the grave with my name. There was no fear as I drove home, only a profound sense of connection to the past and a curiosity about what other stories lay hidden beneath the moonlit stones. I knew I would return, night after night, drawn by the history and the mystery of this sacred place. The next few nights at the graveyard were uneventful. The mysterious girl didn't reappear, but the feeling that she had left something unfinished lingered in the air, like the faint scent of old roses growing wild along the fence. With each stone I cleaned and each path I cleared, I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle left behind by those who rested there. My curiosity about the little girl and her connection to the graveyard deepened, and I became determined to uncover more about the history of the estate and its nocturnal inhabitants. On my fourth night, armed with a flashlight and a local history book from the library, I arrived earlier than usual. As twilight faded into darkness, I wandered through the different sections of the graveyard, reading the names and dates, whispering them softly as if to acknowledge those who lay beneath. That's when I noticed something peculiar about the layout of the gravestones. They seemed to form a pattern, almost like a star, with the oldest graves at the center radiating outwards. Intrigued, I followed the pattern, counting steps and making notes in my notebook. My path led me back to the grave of young Alexandria, the girl with my name. Her stone seemed to be at the very heart of the star, a nexus of marble lines stretching across the grass. It felt intentional, like a design meant to convey a message or tell a story. I sat down beside her grave, the history book open in my lap, and started reading about the estate. The land had been owned by a wealthy family known for their philanthropy and their tragic history. Many of their children had died young, and it was said that the matriarch of the family had commissioned the star layout as a symbol of her hope that their spirits would find their way to heaven and guide each other home. As I read, the wind picked up, rustling through the pages and the trees overhead. And then I heard it, a soft, distant laughter, the sound of children playing. I stood up, my heart filled with an inexplicable joy, and followed the laughter as it echoed softly around the gravestones. It led me to a new section of the graveyard, one I hadn't explored yet. Here, the stones were smaller, simpler, marked with only first names and single dates. They were children's graves, a hidden garden of lost youth. In the center was a small bench, and on it lay a doll, old and worn, much like the one the girl had held. I approached, feeling an overwhelming sense of terror wash over me. Picking up the doll, I dusted it off and placed it carefully back on the bench, arranging it as if it were waiting for its owner to return. The laughter had faded, and in its place, a gentle calm settled over the area. That night, I didn't just clean. I maintained, preserved, and honored. I realized then that my job wasn't just about upkeep, it was about caretaking, about preserving not only the physical but also the spiritual heritage of those who had passed. As I left the graveyard at daybreak, the first light casting long shadows behind the stones, I felt a connection not just to the history of the place, but to the lives that had touched it. The girl with the doll had shown me more than just her own grave. She had revealed the heart of the graveyard, a place where memories lived and whispered their stories to those who would listen. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the atmosphere around the graveyard shifted. The estate was preparing for an annual event I had only heard whispers of, the Festival of Lights. It was a night when the local community gathered to honor the memory of those who had passed, not with mourning, but with celebration, lighting candles and placing them on every grave, a spectacle of warmth in the chilling autumn air. Curious and drawn to the unfolding history, I volunteered to help with the preparations. It felt right to contribute more actively to the preservation and celebration of the lives commemorated here. The estate's caretaker, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Harrow, briefed me on what needed to be done. We were to arrange hundreds of candles, set up small lanterns along the paths, and ensure everything was perfect for the visitors. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first guests began to arrive, the graveyard transformed. The usually somber gray stones now stood out against the soft glow of candlelight, each flame a testament to a life remembered and cherished. Families, friends, and even strangers walked the paths, sharing stories or enjoying the quiet solitude. I moved among the visitors, making sure the candles stayed lit and the paths remained clear. I felt the community's deep connection to this place. It wasn't just a graveyard, it was a historical archive of human emotion and memory, each candle illuminating a story, each flicker a whisper of the past. Halfway through the evening, my path led me back to the children's section, the hidden garden where I had found the doll. To my surprise, the bench was adorned with candles, more than anywhere else, and the doll sat in the middle, bathed in golden light. Around me, people gathered, drawn by the serenity of the spot. A small girl, holding her mother's hand, pointed to the doll. "Look, Mommy," she said, her voice a soft chime in the crisp air. She must have been very loved. Her mother nodded, squeezing her hand. "Yes, darling, and tonight she's remembered, just like everyone else." Moved by the scene, I watched as they placed a candle next to the doll, their small contribution to the memory of the unknown child represented by the toy. It struck me then that the Festival of Lights wasn't just about remembering those we had lost, but also about teaching the living the values of remembrance, love, and community. The rest of the evening passed in a blend of light and shadow, laughter and soft conversations. I continued my duties, more observer than participant, yet feeling wholly part of something much greater than myself. As the last candle was lit and the crowd began to thin, I took one more walk through the rows of flickering lights. The whispers of the past seemed to mingle with the crisp night air, a symphony of life and memories played out in light and shadow. I left the graveyard that night with a sense of peace, feeling that my connection to this place was sealed, not just by the tasks I performed, but by the light I had helped share. In the weeks following the Festival of Lights, the graveyard resumed its quiet solitude. The echoes of laughter and light slowly faded into the background, but the experience had changed my perception of the place. It filled me with a sense of duty and reverence, not just for the grounds but for the stories it safeguarded. My nightly tasks became more than routine, they were rituals of remembrance and care. I found myself speaking softly to the residents as I cleaned their resting places, acknowledging their stories, their families, and the imprints they left behind. It wasn't just about maintaining the grounds anymore, it was about honoring the lives that continued to touch the living world in subtle, often unnoticed ways. As autumn waned into winter, the nights grew longer and colder. One particularly chilly evening, as frost began to sketch silvery patterns on the stones, I felt that familiar sense of being watched. Turning around, half expecting to see the little girl in her Victorian dress, I instead found nothing but the gentle sway of bare tree branches against the starry sky. Yet the feeling persisted, a whisper of something, or someone, nearby. That's when I noticed something on the bench in the children's section, a small, neatly wrapped package lying where the doll usually sat. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I approached and found a note attached to it, written in elegant, flowing script, "For Alex, who listens." Inside the package was a book, a collection of stories and poems written about the graveyard and its many inhabitants over the years. As I flipped through the pages, Each story seemed to bring the voices of the past into clearer focus, their joys, sorrows, and lives unfolding in prose and verse, preserved by those who still remembered. I spent the rest of the night reading by the light of my lantern, engrossed in the tales of the people I had come to care for. It was as if the graveyard itself had given me a gift, a way to keep the memories alive and share them with others. With the first light of dawn painting the horizon in hues of pink and gold, I knew my time as the graveyard cleaner was drawing to a close. I had accepted another job, one with less nocturnal hours, and I was thinking of starting a family, imagining telling my children about the importance of memory and history. On my last night, I walked the paths one more time, placing a fresh candle on each grave I had tended to, including the small grave of Alexandria. The little girl with the doll never appeared again, but her presence was felt in every corner of the place, a guardian spirit of sorts, watching over the memories held within. As I locked the gates behind me, I took one last look at the peaceful rows of stones, the flickering candles casting gentle shadows. The graveyard was no longer a place of sorrow or mystery to me, but a place of stories, each one a precious echo of the past calling out to be remembered and celebrated. Driving away, I carried with me the lessons learned and the stories heard, ready to pass them on, knowing that in the act of remembering, we keep the past alive, not just for ourselves, but for all who come after. No, I don't have the source for those movies, I said, already anticipating the next question. And before you ask, it's not mainstream porn you can find by Googling my name. They're videos of me being murdered. I paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. Where would you even find those types of videos? Dark web, maybe? I don't know. I don't exactly like watching myself get killed. The truth was, I'd starred in over 50 of these snuff films. According to the guy who distributed them, I was the most watched and most sought-after snuff star in history. If that's even a thing. You're probably wondering how someone gets into that line of work. Well, the short answer is, by accident. You don't wake up one day and decide, hey, I want to be murdered on camera. In my case, it started with an ad looking for an amateur porn actress. I was new to the business, and the pay seemed decent. The location, a house in a nice neighborhood, didn't raise any red flags. It all seemed legit until I asked to be paid up front. Their response: let's see how you die first. Before I knew it, I was pinned down, and the cameras were rolling. Dying is like going under anesthesia during surgery. It's painful and scary at first, but then your heart slows down, and this wave of euphoria washes over you before everything goes quiet. Lights out. I couldn't tell you if there's an afterlife. I don't stay dead long enough to find out. It's like falling asleep without dreaming. A nanosecond of darkness, and then, bam, I'm back. You'd think a guy whose business is death wouldn't scare easily. But when I suddenly woke up as they were loading me into a shallow grave in the woods, he screamed like a little girl. Seriously, you'd think he was the one who'd been brutally murdered. It took a while to calm him down. Once the shock wore off, he looked me dead in the eye, no pun intended, and said, I'm going to make you a fucking star. I can't go into the gory details of how I get snuffed out, but let's just say the money is great. Way more than I could ever make doing mainstream porn. The problem isn't that my employer is, a death dealer of women. Actually, no other women have been murdered since I started. Just me. Over and over again. The real problem is the reactions I'm starting to get as my popularity grows. The people who recognize me are the most ordinary people you could imagine. School teachers, doctors, even teenagers. Not the creepy monsters hiding in the shadows you'd expect. The biggest shock came when I was in a cafe, and this young dad with his 2 little girls approached me. He just stood there, staring, while his daughters ate their chocolate muffins. I knew he recognized me, even if he didn't consciously realize it yet. As I was finishing my latte, he walked over with this weird grin. "Do I know you from somewhere?" he asked. I was in my comfy clothes, baggy t-shirt, sweatpants, and the pentagram tattoo on my arm was visible. He kept studying me, trying to place me. Just as I was about to say something, his eyes landed on the tattoo. It was like a light bulb went off in his head. His face went pale, and he started stammering before practically running out of the cafe with his daughters. I never worried about being noticed before. The men who watched my movies expected me to be dead. I also never thought my tattoo would be the thing that gave me away. I mean, how many girls have the same tattoo? When I got it, the artist told me it was a popular design. That all changed when I got a call from my mother. My poor mom had no clue about my career. She always thought I was into some glamorous lifestyle stuff, like a personal trainer to the stars or something. I think she preferred the fantasy and always told her friends I was a successful businesswoman. Technically, she wasn't wrong. Anyway, she called me, completely hysterical. "You're alive. You're alive," she kept repeating. After I calmed her down and reassured her I was very much alive, I waited for her breathing to return to normal. "Allison, for a moment, I thought I was speaking to a ghost," she said. My mother was always my biggest fan, and it broke my heart to hear her so upset. The police were here. Men in suits, detectives, I think. "They told me you were dead." "Oh, my sweet girl, they told me you were dead." They had found blood and something about a tape or the internet. The bastards gave me a heart attack. "I knew you weren't dead." That night, I stayed with my mother. I needed to reassure her that I was still physically present, to hug her, and honestly, to reassure myself that I was still part of this world. Deep down, I knew what this was about. Someone who wasn't a complete monster had watched one of my movies and tried to put a name to the woman who should be rotting in a shallow grave. But I always figured people would think the movies were fake. You can only be the star of one snuff film, right? Not 50. A few weeks passed, and things seemed to settle down, apart from my mom losing a year or two of her life. I had decided to quit. It was never going to be a long-term gig. But if I was going to stop, I wanted my final movie to be my best. Go out with a bang, as they say. On the day of the shoot, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. I chalked it up to nerves. I was about to die in the most brutal way imaginable. It was going to be so bad, no one would ever think it was faked. And the fact that it was going to be my last video made it all the more believable. I knew it was going to be painful, but the pain never lasted. All I could think was, this is going to be a spectacular death. And it was. But as the euphoria swept over me and I started to slip into darkness, I saw men in SWAT gear burst into the room, followed by men in suits. As always, I came back to life with a gasp, like a newborn taking its first breath. But this time, instead of being in the room where I was murdered, I found myself on a cold metal slab in what looked like an operating room. Two men in suits stood over me. One was smiling, while the other seemed to be handing him money. "Hi, welcome back," the first man said, putting the bill in his pocket. "I just bet my colleague $50 that you would come back from the dead." "I must say, I'm a big fan of your movies," the second man said with a smile. "Damsel in the Dungeon is my personal favorite." This was the first time I had ever felt truly in danger. Panic surged through me as I tried to get up. The two men smiled at each other before handing me a hospital gown. "Where am I?" I asked nervously. "You have nothing to worry about," one of them chuckled. "It's not like we're going to kill you." They led me to an interview room and sat me down at a table. "You still haven't told me who you are and why I'm here," I said. The two men straightened up. "Sorry for the confusion. My name is Agent Harris, and this is Agent Butler." I looked at the two young agents, their expressions fixed on me. "Agents? Are you FBI or something?" I asked. One of them gave a disgruntled laugh, as if I'd offended him. "Close. We're with the CIA. What do you want with me?" I didn't know dying was illegal. The agents exchanged a look before turning their attention back to me. Agent Harris placed a picture of a woman in front of me. "We need your help with a delicate situation," he said. "It's of the utmost importance to the security of this country." I looked down at the picture. The woman looked eerily like me. Apart from her expensive clothes and different hair color, we had the same facial features and seemed to be the same height. The woman in the picture is the wife of the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, Agent Harris explained, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked. "She has a lot of secrets that could be very valuable to us," Agent Butler said. "The problem is, her husband isn't a nice man. He treats her terribly. She wants out of the marriage, but he's not going to let her go easily." "I still don't get what this has to do with me," I said. The agents looked at each other again, this time with a smile. "She catches on quick. I'm beginning to like her already." I picked up the picture again, staring at the woman with pain in her eyes and a painted-on smile. "How much does this gig pay?" I asked. Let's be real, everyone loves a good deal. Who doesn't, right? Well, my love for a bargain landed me in this crazy situation, so ridiculous it felt like something out of a bad movie. Except it happened to me. It all started a few months ago. I was broke, my old phone had just died, and I was desperately searching online for a cheap replacement. That's when I stumbled upon this thread about dark web marketplaces. You know, those hidden parts of the internet where you can supposedly find anything, from rare books to, well, let's just say not so legal stuff. Now, I'm not an idiot. I've heard the horror stories about the dark web, scams, illegal activities, the whole 9 yards. But somewhere in that digital jungle, I found a listing for a high-end smartphone, barely used, at a price that seemed too good to be true. The seller had decent reviews, or so I thought, promising fast shipping and exactly what was advertised. Driven by desperation and a little bit of what's the worst that could happen, I went against my better judgment and bought the phone using cryptocurrency. The whole process was surprisingly easy. A week later, a plain package arrived at my door. Inside was the phone, pristine, just as described. I thought I'd outsmarted the system, scored an amazing deal. I swapped my SIM card, downloaded my apps, and life went back to normal. Or so I thought. For a few days, everything was fine. The phone worked perfectly. But then I noticed something weird. The battery was draining way too fast. This was supposed to be a phone with great battery life, so something wasn't right. Curious, I started digging into the phone's settings, trying to figure out if some hidden app was causing the drain. And that's when I found it, this unfamiliar app running in the background. It wasn't just any app, though. It didn't show up in the app drawer or the settings. I had to do some serious digging in the system files to find it. Being a bit of a tech nerd, I managed to extract the app and analyze it. Turns out, it was a super sophisticated piece of spyware, way beyond the usual adware junk you get from dodgy websites. And that's where things took a turn for the worse. So, I've got this phone with some serious spyware on it, and I'm freaking out a little. I called up a friend of mine who works in cybersecurity. He was intrigued and asked to take a look at the phone. After poking around for a while, he gave me the bad news. The spyware wasn't just collecting my data, it was actively sending it to some unknown server. He told me to turn the phone off immediately, take out the SIM card, and factory reset the whole thing. I should have listened. I really should have. But curiosity got the better of me. I decided to keep the phone running for a little longer, just to see what would happen. Worst decision ever. The following Monday morning, I was woken up by this pounding on my door. It was the FBI, and they were not happy campers. They knew everything about the purchase, where it came from, what had been transmitted from the phone. Turns out, the phone's previous owner was involved in some serious criminal activity. We're talking the kind of stuff that makes you want to disappear and start a new life. The agents were stern, but they weren't jerks about it. They didn't arrest me right away. Instead, they asked me a ton of questions. How I got the phone, what I knew about the seller, if I'd been in contact with anyone suspicious. With every question, my stomach sank a little lower. I told them the truth, the whole stupid story about how I thought I'd found a great deal. In the end, they confiscated the phone and told me I have to go with them for further questioning. As I sat in the back of their car, watching my house get smaller and smaller in the distance, I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous this whole thing was. Talk about a lesson learned the hard way. If there's one thing I learned from this, it's that some deals are just too good to be true, especially on the dark web. Sometimes the cost of a bargain can be way higher than you ever imagined. Stay safe out there, folks, and maybe stick to the main roads of the internet. Sitting in that bland room at the FBI headquarters, with nothing but a table and 2 chairs, I felt like I was in a bad cop show. Except this was real life, and the federal agents questioning me were way more intimidating than anything you see on TV. The room was cold, and the tension was so thick you could practically choke on it. An agent sat across from me, looking serious but not exactly mean. "We need to understand your involvement," he said, setting the tone for what was to come. The questions were straightforward at first, mostly about my interactions with the dark web seller, any messages we exchanged, and whether I'd noticed anything unusual about the phone. I explained that I had no idea about the phone's history, that I just wanted a cheap smartphone, and that was it. But as the questions went on, I started to realize how serious this whole thing was. The agent explained, without giving away too much, that the phone was connected to some really bad stuff, illegal and dangerous activities. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd stumbled into something way over my head, just because I wanted to save a few bucks. Talk about a reality check. During the interrogation, I started thinking about how much information our phones collect and transmit without us even knowing. The agent mentioned that the spyware on my phone was part of a bigger network, this sophisticated operation designed to hide people's activities while using unsuspecting people's devices. Crazy, right? After what felt like forever, the questioning finally stopped. The agent seemed satisfied with my answers and believed that I wasn't involved in anything illegal. They decided not to press charges, which was a huge relief. But they confiscated the phone as evidence and gave me a stern warning about buying stuff on the dark web again. Walking out of the federal building, I felt this mix of relief and dread. I was free, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been caught in something way bigger than myself. The city seemed louder, the sun harsher, and I felt exposed, like anyone could be watching me. The drive home was filled with thoughts about how naive I'd been about online privacy and security. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. I knew I had to be more careful in the future. For anyone reading this, let my experience be a warning. The dark web might seem exciting, but it's a dangerous place. Stick to reputable websites, and remember, if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. Even though I wasn't charged with anything, the whole FBI experience shook me to my core. I was free, but it felt like I dodged a bullet. It was a wake-up call to take my digital security seriously, something I thought only people with something to hide needed to worry about. Turns out, even ordinary folks like me need to be careful. In the days that followed, I went on a deep dive into online security. I learned about VPNs, strong passwords, and the importance of keeping my software updated. Basically, all the things that can protect your digital life from prying eyes and bad guys. I also started paying attention to the privacy policies of the apps I used, something I'd always ignored before. And, get this, I even signed up for a cybersecurity class at my local community college. That class was a real eye-opener. The instructor, a former cybersecurity consultant, taught us all about data encryption, secure networks, and how to spot phishing scams. Every lesson made me realize how interconnected we all are online, but also how vulnerable we can be. Armed with my newfound knowledge, I made a bunch of changes at home. I got a new, more secure router, set up a super strong password for my own Wi-Fi, and became way more careful about what I downloaded and the emails I opened. But I didn't stop there. I started talking to my family and friends about what happened, sharing what I'd learned. A lot of them had no idea about these risks, so they were really grateful for the tips. It felt good to turn my bad experience into something positive, helping others stay safe online. I even started sharing my story anonymously in online forums. The response was amazing. People shared their own close calls and lessons learned, and it felt like we were all in this together, supporting each other. Looking back, I realized that my quest for a cheap phone had turned into a life-changing experience. It taught me the importance of digital awareness and how to be a responsible internet user. The ripple effect. The weeks after my FBI encounter were a time of big changes. I was still cautious, but I also felt this new sense of responsibility to share what I'd learned. At first, I only talked about it anonymously online. But as I got more comfortable with my new knowledge and security measures, I started opening up more. I gave a talk at a community center about internet safety, and the response was incredible. It even led to an interview with the local newspaper. Talking about my experience publicly was really empowering. It made me feel like I was making a difference, helping to raise awareness about cybersecurity in my community. And get this, my newfound passion even spilled over into my professional life. Inspired by the cybersecurity class and all my research, I started a blog with easy-to-understand tips on how to protect yourself online. People loved it. They appreciated the practical advice and how I explained things in a simple way. I wrote about everything from creating strong passwords to spotting the signs of a hacked device. Suddenly, I was the go-to person for tech advice among my friends and family. They'd come to me with all their questions about online security, and it felt great to be able to help. But the biggest change was in my own mindset. I used to think I was pretty tech-savvy, but the FBI incident showed me that being cautious isn't the same as being secure. I learned that security is about understanding how technology works and staying ahead of the bad guys. My little misadventure had turned me into a digital safety advocate. It pushed me out of my comfort zone and showed me that even the worst situations can lead to new opportunities. Looking ahead, the months after my dark web mishap were full of surprises. My blog started getting national attention, and I even launched a podcast about digital safety, featuring cybersecurity experts and everyday people sharing their stories. It was amazing to see how my little blog had turned into this platform for helping others stay safe online. I felt like I was making a real difference. One of the most rewarding things I did was partner with local schools to teach kids about cybersecurity. Young people are especially vulnerable online, so I felt it was important to give them the knowledge and tools to protect themselves. My work even led to invitations to speak at conferences and participate in panels, making me a sort of thought leader in digital safety. But the real reward was knowing that I was helping people. The whole experience changed how I see challenges. It taught me that even the toughest situations can lead to growth and new beginnings. And it reminded me that we're all more resilient than we think. Going forward, I want to keep doing this work, reaching more people and spreading the message about online safety. The digital world is constantly changing, and I want to help others navigate it safely. My story started with a stupid mistake on the dark web, but it ended with me finding my passion and helping others. If there's one thing I want you to take away from it, it's this: every challenge has a lesson, and sometimes those lessons can lead you to a future you never imagined. So stay curious, stay cautious, and stay safe online. I've never been one for ghost stories or anything supernatural. But when you're desperate for a job, you start looking in some pretty weird places. And that's how I ended up on the dark web, browsing job listings in the middle of the night. I was holed up in my tiny apartment, broke as a joke, and the usual job boards weren't turning up anything. That's when I stumbled on this anonymous post in a forum known for its shady dealings. The job was simple: security guard for a facility in the middle of nowhere. The pay? Insane. Like, pay off all my debts in a year. Insane. Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? So, against my better judgment, I contacted the person who posted the ad. Their response was quick and to the point. No names, no chit-chat, just a set of coordinates, a start date, and a strict tell no one order. The next day, this unmarked van picked me up at 3 a.m. The driver, this silent dude who stared straight ahead the whole time, handed me an envelope with a wad of cash and a non-disclosure agreement. As the city lights disappeared behind us, I started wondering if I'd made a deal with the devil. It took hours to get to the facility. As the sun came up, we drove down this gravel road through thick forest, and finally, there it was, this compound surrounded by high fences and barbed wire. It looked like a fortress, with cameras and motion sensors everywhere. The driver took me to the main building, this stark, windowless structure that seemed to suck up all the light around it. Inside, I met the head of security, this big guy named Mr. Jacobs. He had the look of someone who'd seen some stuff, you know? He told me about my duties, which were surprisingly simple: patrol the perimeter, watch the security cameras, and respond to any alarms from the secured areas. It's probably just wildlife trying to get in, Mr. Jacobs said, but his voice sounded a little unsure. But on the off chance it's not, hit the alarm and wait for instructions. What exactly are we guarding here? I asked, a question that seems pretty naive now that I look back. Mr. Jacobs looked around before leaning in close. Not everything that walks on four legs is an animal, he said, his voice low and serious. And not everything that looks human is one of us. Yikes. He gave me a tour of the place, and it was like something out of a sci-fi movie. They had thermal imaging, motion detectors, and doors that could probably stop a tank. But none of it made me feel any less uneasy. My first shift was a crash course in creepy. I patrolled these cold, silent hallways, and the only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. The security monitors showed empty corridors and locked doors. It was seriously eerie. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something weird on the thermal camera. There were these irregular shapes moving around in a restricted area called Sector 7. Sector 7 was completely off limits, with steel doors and biometric locks. These shapes were moving in this fluid, unnatural way, like nothing I'd ever seen. It definitely wasn't any animal I recognized. I wrote it down in the log, but I couldn't shake the feeling that these things, whatever they were, knew I was watching them. I spent the rest of my shift freaking out a little. What were those things? Failed experiments? Creatures from another dimension? My brain tried to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. When the sun finally came up, I realized my life had changed. I wasn't just a security guard anymore. I was a keeper of secrets, guarding something way beyond my understanding. Whatever was behind those doors in Sector 7, it was clear that ignorance was part of the job description. Part of me dreaded what the next few nights might bring, but another part, the part that led me to this creepy place in the first place, couldn't wait to find out more. As the weeks went by, I settled into a routine. The nights were long and silent, but I got used to patrolling the corridors and passing those locked doors, wondering what was behind them. But Sector 7 kept drawing my attention. Mr. Jacobs insisted it was nothing to worry about, just a malfunction or some stray animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My job was simple: observe and report. Don't ask questions. They gave me all this high-tech equipment to keep whatever was in Sector 7 contained. But it didn't take long to realize that the tech wasn't just keeping something in, it was keeping me out. One night, I was watching the security feeds when I saw a flicker of movement in Sector 7. It was too deliberate to be random. The cameras in there were motion activated, and they rarely picked up anything. Driven by curiosity, I rewound the footage and zoomed in. And there they were, those shapes, moving with purpose and intelligence. They weren't aggressive, but there was something about their movements that suggested they were aware, maybe even curious. I started watching them every night, trying to figure out when they'd appear. And then, one night, I heard it, this faint whisper coming from Sector 7. It was almost impossible to hear over the air conditioning, but it was there, this soft, undulating sound that seemed almost like communication. I told Mr. Jacobs about it the next morning, but he just reminded me, not so nicely, to stick to my job and not ask questions. What happens in Sector 7 is above your pay grade, he said. His words were meant to shut me down, but they only made me more curious. I was torn between doing my duty and wanting to know more. The isolation of the facility was getting to me, too. The silence of the surrounding wilderness seemed to echo the secrets hidden within the walls. One evening, I decided to do some digging. I accessed the facility's digital library, hoping to find something, anything, about Sector 7. And to my surprise, I found a heavily redacted document that hinted at what was going on in there. It talked about advanced biological entities and non-standard evolutionary trajectories. Basically, whatever was in Sector 7 wasn't just rare, it might be unique, the only one of its kind. The document was mostly blacked out, but it was enough to confirm that I was guarding something truly extraordinary. As I closed the file that night, I felt this weight of responsibility. I wasn't just guarding a building, I was guarding creatures that challenged everything we thought we knew about life. With each passing night, my fear of the unknown was replaced by wonder. What were they? Why were they here? The answers were locked away in Sector 7, whispering through the walls, inviting me to listen closer. As the weeks turned into months, my job became more than just a paycheck. It was a commitment to something bigger than myself. The beings in Sector 7, who once scared the crap out of me, now made me feel protective. I kept doing my rounds, but the facility felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, even though it was built on secrecy. One night, I was on patrol, and the wind was howling through the trees, making the whole place feel extra spooky. Suddenly, this alarm went off. It wasn't the usual loud siren, it was more like a quiet alert, something meant only for Sector 7. I ran to the nearest security panel, my heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the possibility of finally learning something. The screen flashed a code I'd memorized but never thought I'd see: environmental hazard warning. Sector 7 containment breach. Protocol was clear: seal the sector, start the hazard containment procedures, and wait for instructions. But as I got closer to the heavy doors of Sector 7, I heard these soft, almost pleading sounds coming from inside. It wasn't the sound of something escaping, it was more like a cry for help. I hesitated. Instead of sealing the sector, I used the security system to look at the cameras inside. And what I saw blew me away. There they were, the beings I'd only seen as heat signatures and shadows. They weren't human, that's for sure. They were sleek and graceful, moving in this coordinated way, like they were dancing. Even through the camera, I could sense their intelligence. The alarm, it turned out, was triggered by a problem with the environmental controls. The temperature had dropped, and it was putting these beings in danger. As I watched them, it hit me: they weren't just research subjects. They were sentient, aware of their confinement, maybe even suffering. I made a split-second decision. I bypassed the automatic containment procedures and manually stabilized the environment. As the temperature went back to normal, the beings calmed down, and I swear I could sense their relief. That night, my job changed. I wasn't just a security guard anymore. I was a caretaker, a silent witness to something incredible. In the days that followed, I dug deeper into the facility's archives, determined to learn more about these beings. The documents I found talked about genetic marvels, beings that could change how we understand biology. They weren't described as monsters, they were described with awe and respect. This discovery brought a whole mix of emotions. I was still scared, but I also felt incredibly privileged to be a part of this. Every night, as I did my rounds, I'd linger by Sector 7, watching the shadows where I knew they were, sharing this secret with them. I was no longer just guarding a building, I was guarding a sanctuary. But I also knew that the world outside those fences was oblivious, unprepared for the truth hidden inside. Weeks turned into months, and my life at the facility became my whole world. Every night brought new discoveries and a deeper connection to the beings in Sector 7. One day, Mr. Jacobs, the head of security, called me into his office. He seemed different, more open than usual. "We've noticed your dedication," he said, "and we think you're ready to understand more about what you've been guarding." He took me to a part of the facility I'd never seen before. The security was even tighter than Sector 7. And inside? It wasn't more creatures or containment cells. It was a high-tech lab filled with scientists and equipment. These beings, Mr. Jacobs explained, they're not just unique, they could hold the key to understanding life itself, not just on Earth, but beyond. I met Dr. Helen Liu, the lead scientist, and she was incredible. She explained how these beings had abilities that defied our understanding of biology, like super healing powers that could revolutionize medicine. They're a marvel of nature, she said, and how they came to be, whether through evolution or something else, is a mystery we're trying to solve. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guard, I was part of a groundbreaking scientific endeavor. Dr. Liu invited me to observe their research, to learn more about the beings and contribute to their well-being. One evening, I noticed one of the beings reacting to a piece of equipment that measured electromagnetic fields. It was a small thing, but Dr. Liu was excited. This could mean they have a deeper understanding of these fields than we thought, she said. This led to a whole new series of experiments, all done with the utmost care for the beings. I helped out, handling equipment and observing, and I felt this incredible connection to the research, to the beings, and to the big questions we were trying to answer. The facility didn't feel like a place of secrets anymore, it felt like a bridge between worlds. My nightly patrols became journeys through a living laboratory, where every corner held the potential for amazing discoveries. A shared future. Months turned into a year, and my life had completely changed. The facility and its inhabitants were my family, and every day brought new wonders. Dr. Liu and her team, who I now worked closely with, were making incredible progress. The beings in Sector 7, once shrouded in mystery, were now seen as beings of potential and promise. One morning, Mr. Jacobs called me into his office. "We're about to take a big step forward," he announced. "Thanks to the discoveries we've made, and your contributions, we've been given the green light to start telling the world about these beings." The news was both shocking and exciting. The research was too important to keep secret any longer. "It won't be a sudden reveal," Mr. Jacobs assured me. "It will be careful and thoughtful. The world needs to understand what these beings represent, the possibilities they bring to science and medicine." We spent the next few weeks preparing. A small group of scientists and officials were brought in, sworn to secrecy. I helped put together a detailed report with everything we'd learned. I realized that I'd gone from being a security guard to a kind of historian, bridging the gap between the unknown and the known. The day of the first briefing arrived, and a small group of guests gathered in a makeshift auditorium. Dr. Liu led the presentation, with Mr. Jacobs and me by her side. The screens lit up with images of the beings, graphs, and videos of their interactions with the researchers. The room was silent, filled with a sense of wonder. Questions were asked and answered, and it was clear that these beings were not just curiosities, but ambassadors of a new frontier in science. As the briefing ended, I stood by the window, looking out at the facility. The fence that once seemed like a barrier now felt like a bridge between two worlds. I thought about how far we come, from fear to understanding. The facility, once a place of isolation, was now a beacon of discovery. And as I went back to my duties, now shared with a team of dedicated scientists, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The beings in Sector 7, once shadows in the night, were now part of a shared future. We were moving forward, not just to guard, but to guide. Not just to protect, but to participate in a dialogue of discovery that could one day change the world. As the sun rose, casting long shadows over the land, I knew this wasn't the end, but a new beginning. A dawn of understanding in a world filled with mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Let's be honest, I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or anything like that. I've always been a seeing is believing kind of guy. But boredom and curiosity can lead you down some strange paths, and that's how I ended up buying a spirit writing pen from the dark web. It all started innocently enough. I was scrolling through some obscure subreddits one lazy Sunday afternoon when I came across this thread about weird stuff people had bought online. There were stories about mystery boxes and rare collectibles, but one post caught my eye, a pen that supposedly wrote on its own, guided by spirits. The person who posted it shared these sketches and messages that were supposedly written by ghosts, and everyone in the comments was either freaking out or calling it a hoax. But for me, it sparked this weird mix of intrigue and I dare you to try it attitude. So, I decided to see if I could find one of these pens. It wasn't easy, though. The dark web is basically the internet's back alley, full of creepy stuff that most people would never want to see. After a few nights of clicking through confusing and sometimes disturbing websites, I finally found what I was looking for. This small, sketchy online shop was selling all kinds of occult items, and there it was, the Oracle pen, a tool for spirit communication. I bought it half as a joke, telling myself it was for research or maybe a party trick. A week later, the pen arrived in a plain brown package. It looked totally normal, just a sleek black pen, a little heavier than usual. There was a note inside that said, "For best results, use after midnight with a clear mind and a sincere intention. Always be respectful to the spirits." That night, curiosity kept me awake. At 12:01 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a stack of blank paper. I turned off all the lights except for a candle, more for the spooky atmosphere than anything else. Holding the pen loosely in my hand, I whispered a tentative hello. Nothing happened for a long time. Just when I was about to give up, the pen twitched. I froze, not from fear, but from pure disbelief. It twitched again, and then it started gliding across the paper. My heart was pounding as I watched words slowly form. "Thank you for inviting me." The handwriting wasn't mine. It was this neat cursive, like something out of an old letter. The message was polite, even friendly. But seeing it appear out of nowhere gave me chills. Not the I'm terrified kind of chills, but the holy crap, this is actually happening kind of chills. I started asking questions, simple ones at first. Who are you? How did you die? The answers were surprisingly mundane. The spirit said her name was Clara, and she died in the late 1800s from some ordinary illness. She talked about her life in this small town, and it was all very normal, almost boring. But as the candle flickered and the night went on, I found myself totally engrossed in this conversation with someone who was supposed to be long gone. It was easy to forget how weird the whole thing was because it felt like I was just texting an old friend. When I finally went to bed, it wasn't with fear, but with this sense of awe and a million questions. What was making the pen move? Was it really a spirit or something else? I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with possibilities. By morning, my fear had turned into determination. I decided to keep going, document everything, and maybe even find some answers. Little did I know that the real journey had just begun. The next night, I was ready for round 2 with my spirit pen. The sun hadn't even set yet, but I was already setting up my little spirit writing station in the kitchen. Candle, check. Blank paper, check. Oracle pen, check. The pen felt different now, not just an object, but a link to something beyond. Clara, are you there? I asked, barely above a whisper. And boom, the pen started moving almost instantly, gliding across the paper like it was eager to chat. Yes, I am here. It is nice to speak again. We started with some small talk, which felt kind of funny considering the circumstances. But tonight, I wanted to go deeper. If I was really talking to a spirit, I wanted to understand how it all worked. Clara, can you tell me how this works? How are you able to write with me? The pen paused, like it was thinking, and then slowly started writing. It is not easy to explain in terms you would understand. It is like reaching through a veil that is thin at certain times. Your willingness to listen gives us strength to communicate. Okay, cryptic much? But it was also fascinating. It hinted at this unseen world just beyond our perception. I wondered about the mechanics of it all, the energy or whatever it was that made this possible. Clara's answers painted a picture of an existence that was totally different from ours, yet somehow connected. I asked her about her life, the time period she was from. She described a simple life in a small village, her family, her daily routines. It was like stepping back in time, and I could almost picture it. She talked about her favorite place, a meadow filled with wildflowers, with so much detail that I felt like I was there with her. It was easy to forget how bizarre this all was because she sounded so human, so real. As the candle burned lower, I asked a question that had been bugging me. Clara, why do you want to communicate? What do you hope to gain from this? The pen hesitated, then wrote, I seek no harm or favor. It is merely a connection, a way to feel once more the life I once had. Loneliness does not end with death. Her words hit me hard. The loneliness she described was something I could relate to, a universal human experience that went beyond life and death. We talked for hours, and it felt like I was building a real connection with her. When I finally went to bed, I left the pen on the table, feeling this mix of awe and respect for the unknown. I realized I was documenting this not just for myself, but to share a story about communication that defied explanation, about human emotions that transcended the boundaries of life and death. As the sun came up, I knew this was just the beginning. What started as a simple experiment was turning into a journey of understanding, reaching across the veil to connect with something truly extraordinary. I couldn't wait to see what else Clara would reveal. The third night with the oracle pen felt different. There was this quiet anticipation in the air as I lit the candle, its flame dancing in the darkness. The pen, now familiar in my hand, felt almost alive with possibility. Clara, are you there? I asked, my voice steadier now. Her response was instant, her familiar script flowing across the page. Yes, I am here. I am glad to return. Our previous conversations had given me a sense of comfort, so I felt ready to dive deeper. Clara, can you tell me about the spirit world? What's it like where you are? The pen hesitated, like it was processing a complex emotion, then slowly began to write. It is different for each of us. I see fields much like my meadow, but they stretch far and wide. There is peace, mostly, and a waiting. A waiting? What are you waiting for? I asked, intrigued by this glimpse into her reality. For moments like these, for connection. We exist in a state of awareness, but it is the interactions with your world that bring us moments of true consciousness. Her words painted a poignant picture of the afterlife, one that emphasized connection and consciousness. It was a far cry from the spooky ghost stories I heard. Clara's description made it sound almost peaceful. I wanted to know more about how she perceived our interactions. Can you see me? How do you sense my presence? I do not see as you see. It is more a feeling, an impression of your thoughts and emotions. You are like a light in dense fog, bright and focused. Her words suggested a way of experiencing the world that was beyond my comprehension, but the analogy was comforting. Despite the vast differences between our realms, we were connected. I ventured further. Clara, have others tried to communicate with you like this before? There have been a few. Not all seek to understand. Some fear, some try to exploit. But with you, I find a genuine quest for knowledge and respect. Her answer highlighted the uniqueness of our connection. It wasn't just about the paranormal, it was about trust and mutual respect. As the candle burned lower, I asked, Clara, what do you think the purpose of these communications is? Why is it allowed? It serves as a reminder that existence is layered, more complex than the physical world perceives. It teaches both sides, enriches the soul, and expands the mind. For some, it brings closure. For others, like you, it brings knowledge and a wider view of the universe. Her explanation resonated with me. Our conversations weren't just about talking to a ghost, they were philosophical explorations that challenged my understanding of life and existence. That night, I felt a sense of peace. The initial apprehension had given way to a deep appreciation for the extraordinary dialogue I was part of. Thank you, Clara, for sharing so much with me, I wrote, feeling truly grateful. And I thank you for listening and understanding, she replied through the flowing script. As I got ready for bed, the reality of what was happening hit me. I wasn't just talking to a spirit, I was learning about a different kind of existence, sharing a bond that transcended time and physical form. And as I drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with meadows and mists, a reflection of the incredible journey I was on. The fourth night with the oracle pen brought a wave of unexpected emotions. As I prepared my usual candlelit setting, I couldn't shake off a feeling of apprehension. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a sense of venturing deeper into uncharted territory. Clara, are you here tonight? I asked, half hoping for a pause, a break from this new reality. Her response was immediate and reassuring. Yes, I am here. It seems you are troubled tonight. I was surprised by her perceptiveness. Yes, a bit. It's all becoming very real, very fast. Does communicating like this ever affect you negatively? I needed to know if there were consequences for her on the other side of the veil. The pen moved slowly, thoughtfully. There is no harm in our talking. It is a choice, and I choose to be here with you. There are boundaries that cannot be crossed, and they protect us both. Her reassurance calmed my nerves, and inspired by her openness, I ventured into new territory. Clara, do you ever miss it, living, being part of the physical world? Yes, at times, especially during our talks. There are aspects I miss deeply, the sun on my face, the sound of laughter. But where I am, there is a different form of existence, less tangible but equally rich in other ways. Her answer humanized her, reminding me that she had once lived and breathed and experienced life just as vividly as I did. It made our interactions feel even more real, more meaningful. Curious about the boundaries she mentioned, I asked, what kind of boundaries exist for you? Are there rules to this communication? Indeed, there are rules. We are advised to maintain a respectful distance, not to seek influence, but to share and learn. Our worlds are separate for a reason, and while the veil is thin at times, it is always there. Her words painted a picture of a structured spirit world, with guidelines and wisdom. It was a far cry from the chaotic hauntings you see in movies. Clara, what do you think the purpose of these communications is? Why is it allowed? I probed, trying to understand the bigger picture. It serves as a reminder that existence is layered, more complex than the physical world perceives. It teaches both sides, enriches the soul, and expands the mind. For some, it brings closure. For others, like you, it brings knowledge and a widened view of the universe. This explanation resonated deeply. Our conversations weren't just about the paranormal. They were about expanding my understanding of life and the universe. As our conversation drew to a close, I felt a sense of peace. The initial fear had been replaced by a profound appreciation for this extraordinary connection. Thank you, Clara, for this understanding. It's more than I ever expected. And I thank you for respecting and valuing what I have to share, she replied through her graceful script. Turning off the candle, I sat in the darkness, reflecting on the vastness of existence and the incredible bond one had formed. This journey was reshaping my perception of life and what lies beyond, and I was both excited and contemplative about what our final session would bring. The last conversation. As I prepared for the last night of my scheduled communications with Clara, a wave of sadness washed over me. It felt like I was saying goodbye to a dear friend. I set up my candlelit workspace one last time and took a deep breath. Clara, are you ready for our last conversation? I asked, feeling a pang of sadness. Yes, I am here, as always. I sense this is a significant moment for you. The pen glided smoothly across the paper. It is. I've learned so much from you. Tonight, I'd like to ask if you have any messages for me, or advice, as we conclude this. The pen paused, then wrote, cherish the connections you have in your life, those that are seen and unseen. Do not fear the unknown, for it holds as much beauty as it does mystery. And remember, our conversation has been a rare gift. Cherish it as a reminder of the vastness of existence. Her words touch my heart, their simple wisdom resonating with my complex emotions. Thank you, Clara. That's beautiful advice. May I ask one last question? Of course, the script flowed warmly. What happens now for you, after we stop communicating? There is no sorrow in parting. I will continue as I am, but with a fond memory of our talks. Know that I am just one of many who watch and occasionally whisper through the veil. We are always here, in the quiet moments, in the stillness. Her assurance brought comfort. Life, in whatever form it took, persisted beyond what we could perceive. Clara, I don't want to say goodbye, but I feel it's the right time. Thank you for everything, I wrote, my hand trembling slightly. And I thank you for your open heart and curious mind. Remember, goodbye is not forever in the grand tapestry of the cosmos. As the candle flickered out, leaving me in darkness, I felt a profound sense of peace. The pen, now still, seemed like an ordinary object once more. But what it had enabled was anything but ordinary. A world of unseen connections. In the days that followed, I often reflected on my conversations with Clara. I compiled them into a journal, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary dialogue we shared. It wasn't just a record of paranormal communication, it was a testament to the power of connection and the human spirit's ability to reach beyond the physical world. I shared my story online, and as expected, some were skeptical, while others were amazed. But regardless of what others believed, I knew what I had experienced was real, transformative, and profoundly moving. As life returned to its normal rhythm, I found myself more attuned to the subtleties of the world around me, a world rich with unseen connections and silent communications. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I could almost hear the faint scratch of a pen, a comforting reminder that we are never truly alone in this vast, mysterious universe. It all started with this weird email. You know how it is, inbox crammed with spam and junk I never bothered deleting. But this one had a subject line that caught my eye: earn big, real game, no strings. Sounded too good to be true, right? But curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it, and there was this super short message. Are you smart enough to win? Are you brave enough to play? $100,000 for the winner. Respond with I accept to learn more. At the bottom, there was a timer, just 24 hours to reply. No signature, no clue who sent it. Normally, I'd trash something like that without a second thought. But let's be honest, the money was tempting. Bills were piling up, and this sounded like the kind of crazy gamble I needed to get myself out of the hole. So, against my better judgment, I hit reply. I accept. The next day, this small black package shows up at my door. No return address, no courier info, nothing. Inside, there's this sleek, all-black smartphone and a set of instructions. Turn the phone on at exactly 9 p.m. tonight. Follow all instructions. Survive. Okay, that should have been the part where I chucked the whole thing in the trash. But something about the secrecy hooked me. Worst case, it was a prank. Best case? Well, $100,000 is a life-changing amount of money. So, at 9 p.m. sharp, I turned on the phone. The screen lit up with a single message: "Welcome, Player 7." My heart skipped a beat. Player 7? That meant there were others. Another message popped up: "You are one of 11 participants. You will receive further instructions soon. Do not turn off the phone." I sat in my dimly lit living room, staring at the device like it was going to explode. About an hour later, the first real instruction came: "Arrive at the following location in 90 minutes. Bring only this phone. Speak to no one about this." There was an address attached, some old industrial park about 30 minutes away. I wasn't exactly thrilled about driving out to some sketchy part of town late at night, but by this point, I was in too deep to back out. When I arrived, there were already a few people hanging around outside the building. They looked just as uneasy as I felt. Nobody spoke, but we kept exchanging glances, like we were all trying to figure out if we'd made a huge mistake. At exactly 11 p.m., the doors creaked open. This guy in a gray suit greeted us. He had one of those faces you instantly forget, totally unremarkable. "Welcome," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You've been chosen for a unique opportunity. Follow me." He led us into this room that looked like something out of a creepy underground bunker. Concrete walls, no windows, just a single flickering light overhead. There were 11 chairs arranged in a circle, and in front of each chair was a black envelope with a number printed on it. Mine said 7. "Sit," the man instructed. We all obeyed. Once we were seated, he explained the rules. The group must unanimously vote to identify the leader by the end of each round. If the leader is not correctly identified, all remaining participants will be removed. If you falsely accuse someone, you will be removed. The leader's role is to remain hidden while guiding the group to make decisions. Removed? I finally asked, breaking the awkward silence. The man smiled, but it wasn't exactly reassuring. "That will be revealed in due time." We all exchanged nervous glances. It was obvious that nobody knew who the leader was or if we could trust each other. The man handed each of us a small black card. "The game begins now. Good luck." As soon as he left, the door locked behind him with a loud click. We sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at each other. Nobody wanted to speak first, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, this guy who introduced himself as Logan broke the silence. "All right, let's just get this out of the way. Who here signed up for this willingly?" A few people hesitantly raised their hands, including me. The others looked confused, claiming they had no idea how they ended up there. One woman said she just received a phone in the mail with zero explanation. Another guy swore he was tricked into coming. Then there was the quiet one, Player 3. This tall, lanky guy in his mid-30s hadn't said a word or even looked at anyone since we got there. "Hey," Logan said, pointing at him. "What's your deal, Player 3?" Player 3 slowly looked up, his expression blank. "I'm just here to win." The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Not threatening, exactly, but detached, like he didn't care what happened to the rest of us. Before we could press him further, our phones buzzed at the same time. A new message, round 1. Discuss and vote. You have 60 minutes. The timer on our phones started counting down. It was total chaos. People started accusing each other left and right, throwing out random theories. Some said we should vote for the quiet one, while others argued we should target the loudest voices. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake this feeling that everything was happening exactly as the leader wanted. They weren't just hiding, they were manipulating us, steering the conversation without drawing suspicion. As the timer ticked down, I felt the pressure. The leader could be anyone, and we had no way of knowing. Voting wrong meant elimination, but doing nothing was just as dangerous. When the timer reached the final minute, we had no choice but to vote. I cast mine for player 3. His cold, emotionless demeanor had freaked me out from the start. But when the results were revealed, he wasn't the one accused. Instead, the group had settled on player 9, this timid-looking woman who'd barely spoken the whole time. The door unlocked, and the man in the gray suit returned. Player 9 stepped forward. "Please," she pleaded with us, "you're wrong." But the man just smiled and gestured toward the door. "Your game is ended." The door closed behind her, and we were left in silence. The next message on our phones read, "Round 1 complete. Player 9 has been removed." No further explanation. No clues about what removed meant. But as I glanced around the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we just made a terrible mistake. The silence after player 9's departure was deafening. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. It wasn't just about her absence, it was the unknown. What did removed actually mean? The ambiguity was eating at me. Our phones buzzed again, pulling us out of our thoughts. Round 2 begins now. You have 90 minutes. Discuss, observe, and vote. There was no timer this time, just that cryptic instruction, observe. Observe what? What were we supposed to be looking for? "All right, we can't mess up again," Logan said, taking charge. He was pacing now, his nerves starting to show. "We need a strategy. We can't keep throwing out random names like last time." "But how do we figure out who the leader is?" asked player 5, this young guy who looked more like a college kid than someone who should be involved in this whole mess. Nobody had an answer. "Maybe we start by figuring out who's benefiting from all of this," suggested player 4, a woman in her 40s who had this air of authority about her. "The leader's job is to keep us confused and divided, right? So who here has been stirring the pot?" All eyes turned to Logan. He'd been the most vocal so far, throwing out theories and guiding the conversation. Whoa, he said, holding up his hands. "I'm trying to help, not manipulate." "You think I'm the leader? Go ahead and vote me out, but you'll regret it when I'm gone." It wasn't much of a defense, but it was enough to shift suspicion elsewhere. That's when player 3 spoke for the first time since the last vote. His voice was calm, measured. You're all looking at this wrong. The leader doesn't want to stand out. They're hiding, staying quiet, letting the rest of us tear each other apart. It was unsettling how logical he sounded, as if he wasn't just participating in the game but studying it. Then it's you, snapped player 6, a middle-aged man who'd been nervously fidgeting with his phone since the beginning. You've been sitting there all quiet, watching us like we're lab rats. You probably love this, don't you? Player 3 didn't react. He just stared at player 6, his expression unreadable. Enough, said player 4. Accusing each other without evidence is exactly what the leader wants. If we keep this up, none of us are making it out of here. The room fell quiet again. It was then that our phones buzzed with another message. New information has been distributed. Check your envelopes. We scrambled to open the black envelopes in front of us. Mine contained a single slip of paper with the following message: trust is a lie. Only the leader knows the truth. It wasn't helpful. If anything, it just added to the confusion. The others started murmuring, comparing their notes. Some had cryptic riddles, others had seemingly random statements. Logan read his aloud, the leader's strength is in your weakness. Player 5's was even stranger, 2 truths hide 1 lie. Only player 3 refused to share his note. What does yours say? Logan pressed. None of your business, player 3 replied coolly. See? That's suspicious. Logan exclaimed, pointing at him. He's hiding something. I'm protecting myself, player 3 said. Isn't that what we're all supposed to do? The tension in the room was unbearable. Every interaction, every word, felt like part of some elaborate game we didn't fully understand. And yet, the clock was ticking, even if we couldn't see it. Let's focus, player 4 said, her voice firm. The leader doesn't want us to work together, so let's do the opposite. Share what you know, and maybe we can figure out what's really going on. Most of us nodded in agreement, but player 3 stayed silent, his arms crossed. As we shared our notes, a pattern began to emerge. While the messages were vague, they seemed to hint at manipulation, deception, and trust, or the lack of it. What if the notes are meant to distract us? I suggested. If the leader wrote them, they're probably just messing with us. Or they're clues, player 4 countered. We can't afford to ignore anything. It was a valid point, but it didn't make me feel any better. Every theory we came up with led to more questions, more doubt. Finally, Logan sighed. All right, we're getting nowhere. Let's take a vote. We've got, 30 minutes left? We checked our phones. He was right. Time was slipping away. Fine, player 4 agreed. But let's think carefully this time. No gut reactions, no random accusations. Who's been acting the most suspicious? Once again, all eyes turned to player 3. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice calm but firm. If you vote me out, you're only helping the leader. Or you are the leader, Logan shot back. The back and forth continued until the final minutes, but nobody could agree. When the timer hit 5 minutes, our phones buzzed with a warning. Failure to vote unanimously will result in elimination for all players. Panic set in. People started shouting, accusing, begging. In the chaos, I found myself staring at player 3. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice. "I vote player 3, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. One by one, the others followed, reluctantly casting their votes. When the results were announced, player 3 stood. He looked around the room, his expression unreadable. "You'll regret this," he said simply, before walking to the door. The man in the gray suit appeared again, escorting him out without a word. The door clicked shut, and our phones buzzed with a new message, "Round 2 complete. Player 3 has been removed. Prepare for round 3. As the message faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The room felt emptier, colder. And the longer we sat in silence, the more I began to wonder if player 3 had been right all along. After player 3's removal, the room felt quieter than ever, but the tension was thicker. There was no sense of relief, no feeling that we'd made any progress. If anything, the group seemed more fractured, more uncertain. The next message arrived almost immediately. Round 3 begins now. Observe and eliminate the leader. You have 60 minutes. New instructions have been provided in your envelopes. Another set of cryptic clues. I reached for my envelope cautiously this time, half expecting it to contain something even stranger. Inside was a single word: patience. The simplicity of it unnerved me. What was I supposed to do with that? Around the circle, others were murmuring about their messages. Logan read his aloud. The loudest voice is often the weakest. Player 4's note was more ominous. Beware those who know too little. For the first time, player 6 spoke up. His note simply said, "Trust no one." The messages didn't seem to fit together. If they were clues, they were the kind that only made things more confusing. Logan leaned back in his chair, visibly frustrated. "All right, let's try something different. Let's stop looking at these notes and start looking at each other. If the leader's job is to confuse us, they're doing a great job. We need to focus on what's real." "And what's real, exactly?" Player 4 asked. "The fact that we've already voted out 2 people who might have been innocent? Or the fact that we still have no idea what's actually happening to them?" It was a good point. None of us had any idea what removed meant. We didn't even know if player 9 or player 3 were still alive, or if this was all some elaborate mind game. For the first time, I noticed player 5 fidgeting with his phone. He wasn't looking at the rest of us, his eyes darting back and forth like he was trying to process something. "What's wrong with you?" Logan asked, his voice sharp. Player 5 flinched, clearly startled. "Nothing. I'm just... I don't know. I feel like this isn't going to end well." "No kidding," player 4 muttered. Logan wasn't satisfied with his answer. "Let me see your note," he demanded. "What? Why?" Player 5 stammered. "Because you're acting weird." You're hiding something. I'm not. Player 5 protested, clutching his envelope tightly. Then prove it, Logan pressed. Player 5 hesitated, his grip tightening on the envelope. Finally, he handed it over, his hand shaking slightly. Logan unfolded the note and frowned. The leader watches but never acts, he read it aloud, then looked back at Player 5. What does that mean? How should I know? Player 5 shot back. I didn't write it. Before Logan could push him further, Player 4 intervened. Enough. We're wasting time. If we keep turning on each other, the leader wins. Her words were logical, but the group's paranoia was already spiraling out of control. I could feel it in the way people were avoiding eye contact, the way every movement was being scrutinized. And then there was Player 6. He hadn't said much, but his eyes were darting between us like he was trying to solve a puzzle. What about you? I asked, directing the question at him. You've been awfully quiet. Player 6 looked startled, but quickly recovered. I'm just trying to figure this out, like everyone else. The more we talk, the less sense it makes. That's convenient, Logan muttered. Before the argument could escalate, our phones buzzed with another message. Hint, the leader controls more than you think. The words sent a chill through the room. Not fear, exactly, but the kind of realization that you've missed something important. What if the leader can see what we're doing? Player 5 suggested hesitantly. Like, what if they're watching us right now? No one's watching us, Player 4 said firmly. This room is sealed. It's just us. But how do you know that? Player 5 pressed. What if the leader has some kind of advantage we don't know about? The idea planted a new seed of paranoia. Suddenly, every glance, every movement, felt loaded with suspicion. All right, let's focus, Logan said, trying to regain control. We've got 20 minutes left. Let's figure this out. But no one was listening anymore. The group was splintering, each person retreating into their own theories and suspicions. As the timer ticked down, the pressure became unbearable. I found myself staring at the others, trying to read their faces. Was the leader here, right in front of us? Or were we all just pawns in a game we didn't understand? When the final minutes arrived, Logan stood. We need to vote. If we don't, we all lose. So let's just pick someone and get it over with. His words hung in the air like a challenge. No one wanted to be the first to speak, but no one wanted to stay silent either. Finally, Player 4 broke the tension. Let's take a vote, she said. No more discussions, no more accusations. Just vote for who you think the leader is. One by one, we cast our votes. I chose Player 2. Her quiet demeanor still felt suspicious to me. When the results appeared on our phones, my heart sank. It was another tie, Player 4 and Player 7. The door opened, and the man in the gray suit entered, his expression as unreadable as ever. I tie, he said, his voice calm. Fascinating. He stepped forward, addressing us directly for the first time. You have one final chance to identify the leader. Choose wisely. The pressure was unbearable. My mind raced as I looked between player 4 and player 7. Both had been suspicious in their own ways, but I couldn't shake the feeling that one of them was playing us. Finally, I made my choice. When the results appeared, player 4 was the group's final decision. She stood, her expression calm, almost amused. "You made a mistake," she said simply. The man in the gray suit gestured for her to follow him. As she left the room, she glanced back at us, a small smile playing on her lips. The door closed behind her, and our phones buzzed one last time. The game is over. The leader has won. The words sent a chill through me. We'd failed. The door unlocked, and the man in the gray suit returned. "Congratulations," he said, his voice cold. "You've survived. You're free to go." No explanation, no closure. Just an empty reassurance that we were free. As I walked out of the building, the night air felt strange, almost unreal. The others were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Driving home, I replayed everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Who had been the leader? Had we been wrong all along? Or was the game itself the real test? I didn't have answers, and maybe I never would. All I knew was that I'd been part of something I couldn't explain, something I'd never forget. You know how it is with the dark web. You hear about it in forums, podcasts, and it's all this mix of creepy intrigue and should I really be doing this? Curiosity. So, after weeks of listening to this one podcast that kept mentioning it, I finally decided to take the plunge. My goal wasn't to find anything illegal, okay? I was just curious. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, maybe find some old books you can't get anywhere else. But as luck would have it, I stumbled on something way more interesting than I bargained for. I did the whole anonymity thing, VPN, Tor browser, the works. I drifted through a bunch of sites, mostly outdated designs and broken links, you know, the usual. Then I found this digital marketplace. It looked pretty normal at first, selling stuff like rare music albums and out-of-print books. But then this one listing caught my eye. Lift security cam access, research facility echo. The price was dirt cheap, and my curiosity went through the roof. Live access to a research lab? What could be so special about that? With a mix of excitement and maybe I shouldn't be doing this, I paid with some cryptocurrency and got a link and a password. The login page was super basic, almost boring. I entered the info, and boom, I was looking at a live feed from a bunch of different cameras. Most of them showed typical lab stuff, long hallways, empty desks, computers glowing in dimly lit rooms. But one feed, labeled Containment Room, was different. It was this completely white room, stark and bright, with what looked like reinforced glass on one wall. And inside, there was this figure moving around. It was seriously creepy. It was humanoid, but its limbs were way too long for its body, and its movements were all jerky and unnatural. It wasn't walking or running, it was like teleporting. There were no chains or anything, but it never tried to touch the glass or communicate. But its eyes, man, that was the freakiest part. They were intelligent, like deeply aware. It wasn't just seeing, it was perceiving. I felt like it was looking right at me through the camera. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the sheer weirdness of it all. I started taking notes, writing down everything I saw. I watched how it interacted with the room, which was basically empty except for these vents or speakers in the ceiling. Every now and then, a voice would come from the speakers, all commanding like, but in a language I didn't recognize. The creature would respond, not with words, but with these crazy color changes and patterns that rippled across its skin. It was definitely communicating, but in a way I'd never seen before. I kept the feed running in the background while I searched the rest of the dark web for any info on this research facility Echo. Nothing. It was like this place didn't exist. Except for this camera feed, which I was starting to think wasn't meant for public eyes. Was this some secret experiment? A new bioweapon? Or something even crazier? The possibilities were blowing my mind. But I knew one thing, I had to keep watching. Whatever secrets Facility Echo held, they seemed ready to change everything we thought we knew about life itself. And so, my watch began. The more I watched the live feeds from Facility Echo, the more obsessed I became. Days turned into weeks, and each time I logged in, I hoped to learn more about why this creature was being held there, what kind of research they were doing. But no dice. However, one thing became clear, this creature wasn't just some lab rat. It was actively involved in whatever was happening in that stark white room. One day, I logged in, and the creature seemed more agitated than usual. It was moving fast, almost frantically, like it was searching for something. Then, out of nowhere, it stopped and looked directly at the camera. Its gaze was intense, like it could see right through the screen and into my soul. For a moment, I felt like it knew I was there, watching it from the shadows. It was unsettling, but also incredibly exciting. The intelligence in its eyes was undeniable, and for the first time, I wondered if it was aware of being watched, not just by me, but maybe by others too. I switched between the camera feeds and noticed that several were now showing different angles of the same room, as if whoever was in control wanted to make sure every inch of the space was monitored. There was still no audio, which made the silence even creepier, broken only by those weird commands from the speakers. Then something new happened. A panel in the wall slid open, and this robotic arm reached out towards the creature, holding what looked like a tray of food. The creature approached cautiously, like it was curious but also hesitant. It took the food, if you could call it that, and ate it quickly. Seeing it eat was the most normal thing I'd witnessed so far. It made me realize that even in this bizarre situation, this creature still had basic needs. It wasn't just some scientific curiosity, it was a living being with its own responses and needs. My observations became a routine. I'd log in at the same time each day, watching the creature go about its limited existence. I started to notice patterns in its behavior, how it reacted to certain sounds from the speakers. Sometimes it would freeze mid-movement, other times the texture of its skin would change. My own research was hitting dead ends. Facility Echo was like a ghost online, no records, no mentions anywhere. This secrecy just made me want to understand even more. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I saw, every theory I had about the creature and the people who were holding it. But one question kept nagging at me: what kind of ethical lines had been crossed to create this being? Was it some natural evolution from another planet, or was it man-made, designed to push the boundaries of science? The creature, with its intelligent eyes and unsettling presence, became a symbol of this question. It was clear that Facility Echo was no ordinary research lab, and this creature was more than just a specimen. It was a mystery that needed to be solved. Each time I logged in, it felt like I was peeking into a world that defied everything we thought we knew about science and ethics. A world that maybe we weren't ready for. As my investigation continued, I felt more and more connected to the creature. We were both trapped in our own ways, searching for answers in confined spaces. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to discover, not just about the creature, but about the nature of reality itself. My journey into the depths of Facility Echo was just beginning, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. In the following weeks, my routine became almost scientific. Every day, I'd log in, observe the creature, and feel this mix of wonder and unease. But with every minute I spent watching, I felt more and more responsible. Here was this being, capable of extraordinary things, seemingly trapped and alone. And I was maybe the only outsider who even knew it existed. Then, one afternoon, I had a breakthrough. The creature started interacting with its environment in a new way. It went to the wall opposite the glass and pressed what looked like invisible buttons, these deliberate, calculated gestures. The wall responded with soft clicks, and with each press, the lights in the room dimmed. This was something new. I leaned closer to the screen, captivated. As the lights dimmed to a soft glow, the creature's skin started to emit this slow, pulsating light, almost like it was breathing. Was this communication? A biological response? Or something else entirely? I scribbled down every detail, the timing, the sequence, everything. This was a whole new layer to the mystery. Was this creature more intelligent than I'd even imagined? Did it understand its situation? My focus shifted. I started thinking about the ethics of it all. Who were these people running Facility Echo? What was their goal? And did they have the right to keep this creature locked up like this? My research took a new direction. I was still fascinated, but now I felt like I needed to do something. I started contacting experts, linguists, cryptographers, sharing anonymized bits of the patterns the creature was making, hoping someone could crack the code. And then, out of the blue, I got a message from this expert in ancient languages. They said the symbols looked a lot like a proto-writing system that had been extinct for centuries. Whoa! Not only was this creature intelligent, but it was using a form of communication older than human history. This discovery made my nightly observations even more important. And it was during one of these sessions that I noticed a change in the lab itself. New people showed up, moving with this sense of urgency. They looked ordinary, but something about their behavior felt different. The creature reacted to this change too. It got agitated, moving erratically, the glowing patterns on its skin flickering like crazy. It definitely sensed something was up. Maybe it knew these new people were a threat. Then, one of the new personnel, this guy in a plain coverall, stopped right in front of the containment room's glass. He looked directly at the camera, as if he knew I was watching. And then he held up a sign with a message on it. "We know." Chills, man. My little spying operation wasn't a secret anymore. I was officially part of the story, whether I liked it or not. This changed everything. I knew I had to be more careful, but I couldn't let fear stop me. The creature was trying to communicate, and the lab was clearly up to something. I had to keep going, not just for myself, but for the creature. I started taking more precautions, changing my setup, being more careful about how I communicated with people. But I was more determined than ever to find out the truth. Whoever we were, they knew I was watching, which meant something big was happening. The creature's attempts to communicate, the lab's sudden urgency, it all pointed to something about to go down. I couldn't stop now, not when I might be able to help, to speak up for this creature, to tell its story. As I prepared for the next phase of my investigation, I knew the risks were higher. But I also felt this moral obligation to keep going. We know meant it was my responsibility to find out what they knew, not just for me, but for the creature who, without ever saying a word, had asked for help. The "we know" message was a game changer. It made my mission crystal clear. I had to be careful, yes, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. The creature's attempts to communicate, the lab's weird vibe, it all pushed me to do something, to be more than just an observer. In the days after that message, the whole atmosphere in the facility changed. The personnel were more guarded, and they seemed to be interacting with the creature more deliberately. Even with the increased risk, I kept watching, but now with this sense of urgency. The creature had changed too. It seemed to sense the tension, and its light displays and symbol formations became more frequent, more desperate. It was like it was trying to tell us something important. I was determined to figure out what it was saying. I'd been working with that linguist who'd recognized the ancient language, and together, we started piecing together fragments of the creature's messages. It was talking about loneliness, confusion, and a longing to return somewhere. It didn't say where. But the messages showed that this was a sentient being, far from home, trying to connect, trying to understand. With a mix of determination and dread, I planned my next move. I couldn't keep this information to myself. It was too big, too important. It pointed to ethical violations and scientific practices that needed to be exposed. But how could I do that without putting myself or the creature in danger? The answer came out of nowhere. I got this encrypted email from someone claiming to be part of an international watchdog group that focused on ethical science. They'd seen some of my anonymous posts online and put two and two together. It was a risk, but after doing some serious vetting, I decided to trust them. They offered me a platform and protection to tell the story of Facility Echo. We worked together to put together this expose, laying out all the evidence without revealing where it came from. We shared the creature's messages, showing how intelligent it was and how wrong it was to keep it locked up like that. The story blew up. Major news outlets picked it up, and suddenly everyone was talking about Facility Echo, about ethics and science, about the rights of this creature. The public outcry was huge, and the international authorities had to do something. They launched a full-blown investigation into Facility Echo and the organization behind it. Through it all, I stayed anonymous, a silent guardian of the story I'd helped to tell. Months passed, and things started to change. Facility Echo was shut down, and the details of what they'd been doing slowly came out. The creature, and others like it, were recognized as sentient beings with rights. They weren't just lab rats anymore. I never found out where the creature came from or if it ever made it home. But seeing Facility Echo shut down and knowing that the creature was finally being treated with respect felt like a huge win. I kept doing my advocacy work, but in secret. The whole experience changed me. I'd felt this connection through a computer screen to a being that was completely different from me, and it taught me so much about responsibility and compassion. Looking back, I'm still committed to exposing the dark corners of human ambition and curiosity. The truth, no matter how hidden, needs to be brought to light, not just for the sake of knowledge, but for the sake of those who can't speak for themselves. The story of Facility Echo is a reminder that science needs boundaries, and that even the most alien beings deserve our respect and protection. You know how it is. You're bored, and you start messing around online. You type your name into Google, see what comes up. Maybe some old social media profiles, a mention in your school newspaper, that kind of thing. But when you swap Google for the dark web, things get a little creepier. That's what happened to me, and let me tell you, it's not something I recommend. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was at my computer, just browsing the web, when I came across this forum where people were talking about the dark web. They made it sound like this mythical place, full of secrets and information you couldn't find anywhere else. One person mentioned how you could find out anything about anyone, as long as you knew where to look. That got my attention. Why not? I thought. It's just a search, right? What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, right? Getting onto the dark web wasn't that hard. There are tons of guides online. So, after taking some precautions, I ventured into this hidden part of the internet. It was messy and chaotic, but there was a kind of structure to it. I found this search service that promised to dig up all sorts of information. It cost a few bucks, paid anonymously, of course. The search bar was blinking at me, and in a moment of pure stupidity, I typed in my full name and hit enter. The results weren't instant, which somehow made it even more nerve-wracking. I made a cup of tea while I waited, trying to ignore the growing feeling of unease in my gut. When I came back, the screen was filled with documents, each with a brief description. It was weird seeing my name next to dates and keywords that seemed totally random but also really personal. There was the hospital where I was born, my high school mascot, even mentions of a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. One document, in particular, caught my eye. It was a detailed log of this blog I had as a teenager, something I thought was lost forever. But there it was, every embarrassing post, every cringy photo, preserved in the depths of the dark web. It was seriously unsettling to see those forgotten words, knowing someone or something had been keeping them all this time. As I dug deeper, the information got even weirder. Emails I'd sent years ago, books I'd borrowed from the library, even notes from a biology class, it was all there. It was like someone had created a digital ghost of my past. But the creepiest part wasn't the information itself, it was the fact that someone had gone to the trouble of collecting it all. Why? There were no threats, no signs of anything malicious, but the sheer existence of this database was a reminder that we leave digital footprints everywhere we go. It made me rethink my whole idea of privacy. We think we're anonymous online, but someone, somewhere, could be watching. So, here's my advice. Never search for yourself on the dark web. You might not find someone stalking you or trying to hurt you, but the things you find might mess with your head. What's buried is often best left buried, not for safety, but for your own peace of mind. When I finally logged off, I felt this weight settle on me. My ordinary day had turned into a lesson about the dark side of curiosity. No drama, no danger, just a quiet realization that some things are better left unknown. After my first trip down the dark web rabbit hole, I tried to put it all behind me. But you know how it is. Once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. My mind kept going back to those files, especially the ones that didn't make sense. Why was this random stuff about me being saved? Who would even care? A few days went by, and I tried to get back to my normal routine, work, hanging out with friends, that kind of thing. But I couldn't shake this feeling that there was more to my digital shadow than just old posts and emails. So, late one night, I found myself back at my computer. The house was quiet, and I was determined to figure out just how deep this rabbit hole went. This time, I wasn't just messing around. I was on a mission. I went back to the dark web, but I felt more focused, more prepared. I found a different search service, one that looked more sophisticated. As the search was running, I braced myself. What would I find this time? The results loaded, and a new set of documents popped up. This time, it was stuff from more recently, my online shopping habits, travel itineraries, even records of phone calls I'd made online. Each piece of information seemed harmless on its own, but together, they painted a pretty detailed picture of my life. It was kind of freaky. But then I saw something that really threw me. It was a detailed log of a hiking trip I'd planned but never actually went on. I'd canceled it last minute because of a family emergency, something I'd only told a close friend about. But here it was, documented as if it had actually happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about someone snooping on my past. They could manipulate information, even create fake events. It was like someone was building a digital version of me that wasn't even real. I spent hours looking for a pattern, a reason, but it all seemed random. There were no threats, no demands, just this collection of my life, curated by some unknown person or entity. When I finally logged off, I felt exposed, vulnerable. The internet, I realized, was like this vast ocean where our digital echoes travel further than we can imagine. The dark web was just one of its deepest trenches, where the light of normal searches couldn't reach. I learned to live with the knowledge that these hidden depths existed. I knew that digging any deeper might uncover more than I could handle. In the digital age, curiosity doesn't just kill the cat, it can rewrite its whole story. The lesson was clear: some knowledge is a burden. And on the dark web, even the most innocent search can come back to haunt you in ways you never expected. The days after my last dark web search were a weird mix of normal and not so normal. I went to work, hung out with friends, even went to a community event. But the whole time, I felt like I was being watched, like someone was looking over my shoulder. It wasn't until a week later, while I was cleaning out my inbox, that I found this email from some address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said data inquiry. Normally, I would have deleted it as spam, but after my dark web adventures, I was a little more cautious. The email was super polite, asking me to confirm some information for a data verification process. They listed some online accounts I had, some I recognized, some I didn't. They even had some of my passwords, partially hidden, of course. The sender claimed to be from this nonprofit that protects people from identity theft. Now, normally, that might sound helpful, right? But after what I'd been through, alarm bells were going off in my head. I decided to do some digging. I looked up this nonprofit, and it barely had any online presence. That seemed fishy, especially for an organization that's supposed to be all about online security. Instead of replying to the email, I contacted the websites they mentioned through their official channels. And guess what? None of them had ever heard of this nonprofit. They all told me to change my passwords immediately. Okay, so I dodged a bullet. But it still freaked me out. How did they get my information? Was this another consequence of my dark web searches? I went into full-on security lockdown mode. I updated all my passwords, changed my privacy settings, and even signed up for that cybersecurity course I've been thinking about. If the internet was a battlefield, I was ready for war. But the more I learned about cybersecurity, the more I realized how much I didn't know. Every step I took to protect myself felt like a tiny band-aid on a huge wound. The internet was constantly changing, and so were the threats. This realization made me hyper-aware of everything I did online. I started paying attention to what I shared, the apps I used, the permissions I granted. Privacy wasn't just about avoiding harm, it was about freedom, the freedom to live without being tracked and monitored. And you know what? Taking control of my digital life actually made me feel better. It was a reminder that even though we can't control everything that happens online, we can learn to navigate it more safely. So, I kept learning, kept adapting, and kept one eye on the horizon, ready for whatever the internet might throw at me next. The weeks turned into months, and my little blog grew from a personal project into a kind of online support group for people who cared about digital safety. It wasn't just about sharing tips anymore. It was about sharing experiences and helping each other navigate this crazy online world. As I was busy writing blog posts and answering comments, I realized how much my own view of the internet had changed. It wasn't this scary, unknown place anymore. It was still complicated, but with the right knowledge and tools, I felt like I could handle it. One day, I was invited to speak at a community center about online safety. There were people of all ages in the audience, from teenagers to senior citizens. I shared my story, talked about the lessons I'd learned, and emphasized how important it is to be aware and educated about online risks. People asked great questions, everything from specific security measures to how to protect their kids online. It really hit home how much people needed this kind of information. After the talk, this woman came up to me and thanked me. She said she'd always thought privacy settings were too complicated, but hearing my story made her realize it was worth the effort. It was a powerful reminder of why I started the blog in the first place. Inspired by the community's response, I decided to do even more. I worked with local schools to create a program about digital literacy, teaching kids how the internet works, why privacy matters, and how to be responsible online. I wanted to give them the knowledge to make smart choices and stay safe. As I was developing these programs, I realized that my own journey was a big part of the message. Every blog post, every workshop, every conversation, it was all about raising awareness and empowering people. The internet can be a scary place, but it's also a reflection of us, of how we choose to interact with it. By choosing education over ignorance, safety over convenience, and community over isolation, we can make it a better place for everyone. Finding my place in the digital world. Looking back on my journey, from that first careless search on the dark web to becoming an advocate for digital safety, I'm amazed by how much has changed. It's been a complete transformation, from fear to understanding, from worrying about myself to helping others. The internet is often portrayed as this wild and dangerous place, but it's also a place of connection and community. By sharing our experiences and supporting each other, we can create a safer and more inclusive online world. As I continue to write, speak, and teach about these issues, I'm reminded of the power of curiosity. It can lead us into the unknown, but it can also guide us through it, helping us understand and navigate the complexities of the digital age. In the vast web of the internet, we all play a part. By sharing knowledge and promoting safety, we can create a stronger, more resilient online community. And that's what my journey has been all about, turning fear into empowerment and using my experience to help others find their place in the digital world.